Spooky season is finally here, and today I'm going to tell you all about 10 must-play video games for the Spooktober season. So every year my partner and I spend October watching horror films, and every year I love every minute of it. This year we changed things up a bit and tried out a brilliant psychological thriller called Last Night in Soho, and it got stuck in my head way more than any horror I've seen in recent years. This got me thinking about how this time of year you see lots of lists about Friday the 13th, Until Dawn, Dark Pictures Anthology, The Quarry, Dead by Daylight, and so on. So I thought I'd look a little bit further afield and talk about a more diversified set of spooktastic titles. As my personal experience of video games goes back over 30 years, and my interest in the digital macabre goes all the way back to the very first Resident Evil, I thought this would be an easy list to put together, which I was all in favour of after spending over 30 hours on my Tomb Raider video. However, in researching this list, it quickly became very obvious that horror is a subjective genre, and everyone has their preference.
What's your favorite scary movie?
The Babadook.
That sounds kind of boring to me.
My preconceptions were also challenged when I went back to games that I remembered being quite scary, but found that the fear didn't hold up the second time around. Needless to say, my anticipated shorter production time became, well, not that. But that's okay, because I discovered some truly excellent games along the way. For a game to earn a spot on this list, it had to evoke a very particular feeling in me, which is that the experience was able to unnerve me in some way. My final list of 10 achieved this in a number of ways, ranging from outright grotesque horror to afterlife-related thrills.
I prefer spooky.
So come and join me, if you dare, as I am BacklogBaldie, and these are 10 video games that will help you scratch that Spooktober Halloween itch. Quick note to say, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content and want to see more of it. With that being said, let's get on with the list.
Whoa, don't shoot!
Get down!
Resident Evil 2 Remake. When the Resident Evil 2 Remake released, I booked the day off work and I played it near non-stop for weeks afterwards. But eventually, as we all do, I moved on. Going back to this game after 6 months of Resident Evil 4, the Resident Evil 2 Remake hit me right in the scary feels. The near unbearable tension, the pitch black rooms, the certainty that those bodies will get up at some point / be joined by lickers or dogs, the silence punctuated largely only by your own footsteps, and eventually by some way bigger and truly horrifying footsteps. All of it is very, very palpable. Back in the day, I played mostly as Claire, because I preferred her weapon set. There's probably a joke in there somewhere. But mostly because you eventually get to be free of roided out Fedora Boy. So this time I deliberately played as Leon, and my reduced confidence with his weapon set and his scenario only added even more to the tension. When Mr. X showed up, I made a deliberate effort to not just swat him down with super weapons, again to try and recapture the original scare factor. I mean, yes, this is why we save our magnum ammo, and eventually I got sick of running into him, so I busted out the launcher anyway. And then something like this happens. This dude really gets under my skin. I really do not care for stalker enemies, but I can't deny the effectiveness here. On the one hand, I feel like...
To the right, don't hurt it, those needles are brittle. That's perfect. You guys, A+, A+.
But the rest of me just feels like this.
You guys are assholes! You're assholes!
Switch her
Ron,
off,
you're an
guys.
asshole!
Obviously there's a lot more to this game than just Mr. X, but if I'm going to talk about why a game unnerves me, well, I mean, he speaks for himself. Ghostwire Tokyo. Japanese horror has become synonymous with a particular style of ghostly apparition. That girl from the ring has got a lot to answer for here. Ghostwire Tokyo leans heavily into Japanese horror culture and Japanese notions of the afterlife. Gameplay-wise, it's a straight-up action horror open-world game, and it deserves a lot more recognition than it has ever had. The imagery is creeptacular right from the get-go. From the faceless enemies to the face of your own protagonist. Ghostwire Tokyo is beautifully designed for the horror genre, and it only gets better when traditional Japanese indoor architecture twists and shifts all around you, and when you use Katashiro paper dolls to collect and save the souls of Tokyo's citizenry. Ghostwire is also set in an abruptly deserted representation of Shibuya. If you know Shibuya in Tokyo, and or have played Persona 5, you know it is a constantly bustling metropolis, yet here in Ghostwire, it's always night, and the streets are littered with the effects of thousands of people who were suddenly ripped out of existence. That feeling of being in a place that you know is supposed to be busy, but it's currently empty, adds a thorough level of creepiness to the proceedings from start to finish. There's probably a name for that type of phobia. Still not sold? Have some talking cats. Control Ultimate Edition. From the studio that brought you Alan Wake, Control tells the story of Jessie Faden and her infiltration of a government building. Oh, and don't forget, the building is alive too. Control certainly wastes no time throwing you straight into the paranormal. Somewhere between the transforming gun, the phone that lets you talk to your dead predecessor, alternate dimensions, a sentient pyramid, a looping motel and Doctor Who style transitions, Control will set up shop in the darkest, creepiest reaches of your head and there isn't a damn thing you can do about it. Oh, and don't forget about all the superpowers you accumulate along the way.
That's telekinesis, Kyle!
The building that you're in is called the Oldest House, and as you might expect from all the staff hanging suspended in mid-air, something has gone horribly wrong. A bureau dedicated to researching the paranormal clearly isn't wasting their tax dollars here. You'll find so many background facets devoted to the study of the weird and wonderful, including occasional infomercials from the resident science dude. And by far the most horrifying thing in the entire game is this quality piece of edutainment.
Let's join the Threshold Kings! Let's join the Threshold Kings!
I don't even need to say anything, right? The creepy factor is just so far beyond blatant here. If you played this game at launch, you'll be relieved to hear that it now has difficulty modifiers, as the original was very challenging, but even that is not going to save you from evil floppy disks or puppets that would give Annabelle a run for her money.
TV! Let's watch Jockeys in Space!
Limbo. Okay, so initially I wasn't going to put Limbo on this list. It's a very eerie premise for sure, and the sudden deaths can ramp up the tension quite a bit, but I have a high horror tolerance and wasn't really fazed. But then I got to the spider. Now I'm not a full-blown arachnophobe by any means, but spiders are definitely quite high up on my creepy list. So when the branches were revealed to actually be legs that wanted to cheerfully impale me, my high tolerance of the macabre was put to the test, but my genuine unease came when I realised what had happened to the sound. In a largely silent game, to suddenly have this dark, oppressive layer of sound-driven fear pressing in on your eardrums really ups the tension. It's also the first real puzzle test that you come to, and when you think you've got it, the third leg throws you a curveball. If curveballs stabbed you in the face. I don't know, I don't really get baseball. This isn't the only time you meet this spider, and this atmosphere is present every time. You come to recognise the signs, as well as the audio cues. The tension builds and builds because you know what's coming. There's a bit where you don't realise until it's too late, but you become stuck and unable to move. And then you realise that you're stuck in webbing. And sure enough, that tension starts to build. The audio cues kick in, those limbs start to appear, and I'll stop there for spoilers. I'll be honest, without the spider, I don't think this game would have made the cut, and I'm sure there's a lot more to this game than just the spider. I mean, I tried Inside and it didn't affect me at all, and I tried Little Nightmares, but it just got on my nerves. But as it is, Limbo is definitely a game I recommend for putting your puzzle and survival skills to the test. Resident Evil Revelations 2. Revelations 2 is a game that I always forget that I have. I remembered it being average at best and being annoyed about its episodic release schedule.
Which was the style at the time.
And unbearable levels of cheese. Yes, even by Resi standards. I mean, check this out.
Terror save. Because tear doesn't have to end with a wrist.
However, what you get in Revelations 2 leans well into the horror genre, and it combines different elements better than you'd think. Whilst Claire is more than capable as a protagonist, she's not special forces like Jill, or a presidential level ninja like Leon. And whilst your companion might not be entirely useless, she has a phobia of firearms and is certainly limited. She makes herself useful in other ways, and it forces you to make proper use of the dual character system, but her ability to defend herself is hugely diminished. This balance is maintained when you switch to Barry also, because even though he is special forces, his companion is an absolute no-go for any kind of combat whatsoever. Balancing everything with a weaker companion really ups the feeling that things could go horribly wrong, especially when you're separated for puzzle purposes. Ammo is pretty plentiful, and being able to give the monsters the old 1-2 with Moira's crowbar helps a lot here, but it's easy to get overwhelmed with just a basic handgun and a knife. You get a shotgun very early on, but it only holds 2 rounds, and it's a slow reload, and the first time you use it is probably going to be on one of these guys. And even on easy mode, they will not go down in 2 shots. Add to this some truly grotesque imagery and a plot based around measuring your fear, and you have a surprisingly solid survival horror experience. I have to give a special bonus award here to Moira's near constant and pretty inventive levels of cursing.
I mean, what in a moist barrel of fun is...
As well as Claire's delightful callbacks.
Are you gonna use that? It's more reliable than any person.
If you say so.
That was almost a Claire sandwich.
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
There's also a raid mode if you're into that kind of thing, or you just want to see Claire before she heads off to the rodeo. The Medium. The medium is a masterful example of atmospheric storytelling. Never before in a game have I experienced such constant feelings of unease and dread, and the growing certainty that I was not alone. The medium subverted so many of my expectations very quickly by making the unknown the known, but then expertly steering the story into new territory, piling even more unknowns upon you. The medium is a bit like a point-and-click game where you explore each area for objects to interact with and clues on how to progress. Your character has psychic abilities, and at times is able to navigate the parallel spirit world as well as our own, and this is achieved by splitting the screen in two, showing you in both worlds, with your movement in both always being exactly the same. Marianne's narration is a great way to anchor the player in an otherwise largely solitary existence, and her sarcasm plays something of a dual purpose.
Keep hissing at me. Who do you think's gonna feed you now?
On the one hand, it helps break up the otherwise constant atmosphere.
Just trying to diffuse the tension.
But on the other, it shows that the writers really did their research on trauma survivors. A common trait is being comfortable with subjects that make others feel uncomfortable, often with humour that others might deem inappropriate.
I used to get a lot of these. To me, they were like trophies.
And this is often because they need to find a way to live with their experience, and being able to laugh at it can really take away its power over you. I was also very impressed at how Marianne was written interacting with the spirits.
I mean, you seem pretty cheerful to me.
Well, it's what I remember.
Put simply, she treats them like people because that's what they are, most of the time. The medium does a wonderful job of continually challenging your expectations and throwing in new ideas and gameplay mechanics without ever sacrificing the core experience. And through all of it, I didn't experience one single comfortable moment playing this game, not even when I fed the cat.
Here you go. What's your face? Glad to see you're still kicking around.
Lies of P. Pinocchio Souls has pleasantly surprised me in so many ways. But those surprises work both ways, and I'm here to tell you how between everything that makes Lies of P one of the best Souls-likes I have ever played, it also deeply creeps me out. Lies of P opens with a very innocent looking protagonist, a full-on steampunk aesthetic, and mechanical puppet enemies. Unlike the marionette stylings of Devil May Cry, the animatronic puppets here move in a far more jarring fashion, like the nurses in Silent Hill, and they close in on you with surprising speed. Lies of P is designed around blocking and countering, and this keeps you up close and personal with the enemies, and the creep factor is raised because of it, quite literally keeping it in your face the entire time. At this point I've spent more than enough time going toe to toe with these horrific mechanical adversaries, combining the fashion sense of a Penny Dreadful with stunted mechanical aggression, and the first real boss of the game is a circus ringmaster. Imagine that, guys, a massive and imposing presence in the stylings of a circus boss. It was the ultimate introductory bulky bully, and it took me 6 attempts to beat him. Learning the moveset and timings of a boss in any Souls-type game isn't new, but being genuinely creeped out and actually a little bit afraid was definitely a new sensation for me, owing to having to stand my ground against him most of the time, as I quickly learned that dodging was not the way to go. Even though I was eventually able to bring down this hulking great indiscriminate murder machine, I'll never forget the tension that went along with it. Or to put it another way, remember how you had to learn to block and parry in Sekiro? Imagine that, but with nightmare fuel puppets. DmC Devil May Cry. Yep, that's right, the game that everybody hated, despite being a genuinely brilliant one. But I'm not here to wax lyrical about how it's underappreciated, or how you can in fact make Dante look like, well, Dante if you want. No, I'm here to explain why DmC is worthy of your spooky schedule. In this mature and real-world take on the canon, our world exists alongside another world called Limbo, which is where all the demon shenanigans go down. The world can twist and change around you, sometimes trapping you, sometimes trying to kill you, and sometimes pulling you back while you try and escape, with action spilling over into the real world at times, and the inhabitants and the imagery is truly demented. For all of this, the game is not remotely scary, though the cutscenes actually do manage to evoke some excellent spooky vibes, really capturing the hopelessness of a bleak existence. Kinda like Silent Hill if the protagonist wasn't remotely afraid of it, DmC looks and feels more demonic than any of the games in the mainline series. Just my opinion, calm down purists, and the story takes a fascinating look at how evil can exist just beneath the surface, making demons seem like far more of a threat this time, instead of just being sword fodder for you to rack up combos on. Like how a CCTV camera can be a watchful demonic eye, or how the reflection of a tower in water can actually be a subterranean prison. The idea of our world being controlled by secret cabal type societies is nothing new, and let's face it, probably true, but this was the first time I saw the idea represented through twisted demonic imagery, and truly insidious methods of controlling the population. It's also thankfully a fantastic action game, with buckets of Metroidvanian replay value, and the DLC, which amps up the creep factor even further. The Evil Within 2. Some of you might remember Shinji Mikami, the mastermind behind the original Resident Evil and Dino Crisis. Well, he was also behind the Evil Within titles, and frankly guys, I'm worried about him. I just want to give him a cuddle and ask him,
Who hurt you?
I already knew roughly what happened in the first game, so I jumped into the sequel, and very soon I was somewhere between the end of Insidious and Drop Dead Fred. Everything from the angles to the decor, to the elements changing around you, it's just so twisted, and the way things shift when you look away from them, it's all really unnerving, and this is before you even see a hint of an enemy. The close-up photographs of facial features everywhere, eyes mostly, made me deeply uncomfortable, but they were a nice throwback to the original Resident Evil title screen though. Something was obviously playing a game with me. It doesn't take long to put a face to the horror, but make no mistake, you still do not know which way is up, because that face is soon joined by other faces, all combined in the same freaking body. Seriously, Shinji, are you okay? When you escape into the game proper, you're armed and you're dropped into something resembling suburbia, even though something is obviously wrong. The removal of the hyper-twisted imagery lulls you into a slight sense of security. But then you go into the first house, and once again, I am a bit worried about Mikami-sama. This is hands down the worst rendition of Eat Your Vegetables I've ever seen, and I was left just as disturbed, if not more, than when I've been trying to navigate Beetlejuice's Spank Bank. And finally, Resident Evil Remake. Pure terror. Cubed. That was all it said on the back of the game case when the Resident Evil remake originally came out for the GameCube, and that really did say it all. The remake looks spectacular today, in HD of course, and it boggles the mind how something this good was made over 20 years ago. There are a few things separating this entry from the other Resident Evil titles on this list, and one of them is fixed camera angles. A big part of fear is the element of the unknown, and when you don't know if you're going to turn the corner and walk right into something that wants to eat you. That fear is certainly elevated. Or cubed, you might even say. Your characters aren't exactly slow, and thankfully the tank controls were upgraded for the HD remaster, but every action is deliberate. Precision aiming hadn't been invented yet. There are also no fully automatic weapons here, and the enemies are bullet sponges. They just keep on coming, and any headshot potential is now weighed against RNG, so finding the shotgun is no longer the path to easy mode. Oh, and let's not forget the unbearable tension that goes along with zombie corpses no longer disappearing when you return to rooms. Unless you burnt them or decapitated them first time around, they will eventually turn into Freddy Krueger. Oh, and that's just the zombies. Believe me when I say they are not your only problem. And there we go, horror fans. Those were my top 10 picks for Spooktober video games outside the obvious slasher titles, of course. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed researching and making it, and I hope you were able to find something to satisfy your Halloween cravings. Thank you very much for watching. Baldy out.